Welcome to Minnesota's 9/11 Day of Remembrance. I'm Tom Lyons, the host of Minnesota Military Radio. Despite our shared grief in the aftermath of 9/11, hope, resilience, and unity lifted us up as a nation and as a state. 20 years later, these lessons are more important than ever. Today, we remember the compassion we showed to one another, the resolve that Minnesota demonstrated to the world, and how, in the face of unfathomable loss, we rose as one. Please stand for the entrance of the official party. Thank you. You may be seated. September 11th, 2001, 20 years ago today, changed more than the skyline of New York City and the Pentagon. The attacks changed a generation of Americans, Minnesotans, and our world. That day's destruction and devastation did not condemn this country to failure filled with fear. No, this loss, as profound as it was, did not break the soul of our state or nation. It made us stronger. How fitting that we can gather once again as a state and community here at the Capitol steps, just like we did in the days following the attacks 20 years ago. Our program today exemplifies what has come of our nation as we remember and honor those lost through the eyes of all communities impacted by this day. Rescue and recovery professionals, witnesses and survivors, service members, veterans, and most importantly, our 9/11 and Gold Star families. This is the beginning of a year-long remembrance spearheaded by the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs 9/11 and Global War and Terrorism Remembrance Task Force. The task force was formed to honor and remember Minnesotans, Minnesota veterans, and their families whose lives were forever changed by the events of 9/11 and the Global War on Terrorism. It's my honor to introduce the official party here today, Minnesota National Guard Chaplain Colonel Dan Pulju, 9/11 family member, daughter of Tom Burnett, Mariah Jacobsen, Gold Star mother of Corporal Ben Kopp, Jill Stephenson, retired General Joseph Votel, Minnesota Commissioner of Public Safety, John Harrington, Minnesota Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, Larry Herke, Representative Betty McCollum, Senator Tina Smith, Senator Amy Klobuchar, and our Governor, Tim Walz.
September 11th was a Tuesday morning in 2001, and it started out like any other weekday morning for me. I was training for the Marine Corps Marathon at the time, and so I probably had an 8 or 9 mile run scheduled for that particular Tuesday. Put on my running clothes in our locker room, went running through the streets of suburban Maryland, and as I was out running 4 or 5 miles from the office, a woman pulled over in a minivan. And she got out, and she was absolutely hysterical, and she must have seen the fact that my running shirt said Air Force across the front of it. And I said, "Ma'am, what's wrong? What can I do to help you?" And she started trying to describe what had happened in New York City in the time I'd been out running and what had happened at the Pentagon. And I couldn't believe that anything she was saying was true. I mean, it was a perfectly beautiful morning when I'd left the building, 45 or 50 minutes earlier. But I thought, I better just hightail it back to the office and see if there's anything really going on. And of course, by the time I got back to the office, all of my coworkers had CNN up on the office television, and we were watching the coverage, and it was just playing the collapse of the towers over and over, and the smoke just billowing from the Pentagon endlessly.
Everybody says your mind slows down time really quickly in a real stressful situation. And what probably took couple seconds at most. It seemed to me like it's just slow motion, because when the plane hit, we didn't know it was a plane. We just knew it was a really tremendously loud, explosive sound above us, and the tower tipped quite a ways. I mean, I remember stumbling towards the one wall and then stumbling towards the other when it righted itself. It just seems such slow motion. I can describe it almost to the T how I felt when it, when it knocked us both ways as that tower, that tower tilted so far from the explosion. And again, we had no idea what had happened.
We lost 2,977 victims on September 11th during the attacks. Law enforcement, firefighters, and emergency workers nationwide have undergone a transformation since 9/11, and their professionalism and commitment to our safety is sincerely appreciated by all citizens. I ask you all to please stand as a color guard from the St. Paul Police Department will advance forward to the stage from the Minnesota Police Peace Officer Memorial side of the Capitol Mall, and a color guard from the St. Paul Fire Department will advance forward from the Minnesota Fallen Firefighters Memorial side of the Capitol Mall. The groups are led by the Minnesota Pipes and Drums, presented by the Emerald Society of Minnesota Police and Fire Department Color Guards. Post. In order to honor both the commitment and sacrifices of our armed forces, a joint color guard representing the United States Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Coast Guard will present our national, state, and respective military service colors. Please remain standing as the 34th Red Bull Infantry Division performs the Star-Spangled Banner and the Minnesota National Guard's Duluth-based 148 Fighter Wing honors our nation with a flyover and missing man formation in remembrance of all lost in 9/11. Military Color Guard, post. Please be seated. I got to go off script for a second. That was incredible, wasn't it? Thanks to the 148th Fighter Wing. Thank you to our joint military, police, and fire department color guards, the 34th Red Bull Infantry Division Band, and the 148th Fighter Wing. The depth of reflection required to grasp and cope with the events of 20 years ago affected us all, no matter your race, gender, origin, or religion. We relied on our faith community to lead us through these difficult times. Imam Hamdi Sawaf, Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman, Elder Stacy Smith, and Archbishop Bernard Hebda have provided this message in honor of today's solemn occasion.
I remember 9/11 well. I lost a cousin that day at the Pentagon. 9/11 taught us the difference between good and evil. And in the face of good and evil, the only truth that we could turn to was in the face of God. And I believe, and still believe to this day, that the only truth that we can turn to is God. Therefore, I would like to offer this simple prayer. My prayer, the prayer I pray whenever I'm faced with confusion, destruction, uncertainty, and that is the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
In the name of Allah, most gracious and most merciful, the cherisher and the sustainer of the whole universe, I greet all of you with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God upon all of you. Our Lord, we believe that من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. If someone killed a person not in retaliation of murder or spread of mischief in land, it would be as if he killed all mankind. ومن أحياها فقد أحيا الناس جميعا. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of mankind. Our Lord, we believe that we should keep hope at the highest esteem ever, and definitely, certainly without any doubt, justice will prevail. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you.
As the Jewish community is in the midst of our high holy days, we look back in the year previously that we've lived, and we look forward to the hopes of the future. This is a moment of an anniversary of 9/11, the 20th anniversary, and we look back and we look forward at the same time. Our hearts are with the families of those who lost loved ones in 9/11, in Washington, D.C., in New York City, in Pennsylvania. And our hearts and prayers go out to those who were traumatized, survivors of 9/11. And so we look forward and we ask for hope when we feel despair, love when we feel hate, humility when we feel hate. And it is in that we follow the words of the prophet Micah, Ki'im asot mishpat, to do justice, v'ahavat chesed, to love goodness, v'hatznei lechet im Elohecha, and to walk humbly with your God. Amen.
Let us pray. O God of love and healing, look with compassion on us, Minnesotans of many different faiths and traditions, who gather to remember the events of 9/11. Still overwhelmed by the magnitude of a tragedy that occurred 20 years ago, we continue to seek your healing, your light, and your guidance for ourselves and for a world that is far too often fractured by historic prejudices and a failure to understand that we are all members of one human family. Be present, O Lord, to our violent world. Place your peace, a bold peace, in our hearts, so that we together might sow seeds of lasting peace in our families and among the nations of this earth. Turn us to you and to your way of love whenever our hearts and minds are hardened by hatred and tempted by revenge, whenever we are unable to see you in our brothers and sisters, whenever we fail to see the value of each human life. Comfort and console all of us, strengthen us in hope, and give us the wisdom and courage we need to work tirelessly for a world in which your love will one day reign among nations and in our communities. May our memory of 9/11 lead us closer to you, O Lord. We ask this in the name of Jesus our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Imam El-Sawaf, Rabbi Zimmerman, Elder Smith, and Archbishop Hebda. I want to take a moment and recognize those dignitaries in the audience today. Let me begin by recognizing the most important people here among us. We're in the presence of the Minnesota 9/11 and Gold Star families who have had loved ones killed as a direct result of the events that occurred 20 years ago today. We are humbled to be in your company, and I ask you to join me in expressing our sincere gratitude to the families who have borne unspeakable loss since that day. I also wish to acknowledge those law enforcement, firefighters, first responders, military members, and veterans who have served since 9/11, as our state and nation have relied upon you to preserve our freedom. Thank you. Other special guests with us here today is First Lady Gwen Walz, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, Speaker of the House Melissa Hortman, and members of the Minnesota Legislature have joined us today. Commissioner of Revenue Robert Doty, Commissioner of Education Mary Kathleen Ricker, St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter, Canadian Consul General Ariel Deloya, Adjutant General Major General Sean Mankey, Major General Joanne Clybourne, Deputy Adjutant General Brigadier General Sandy Best. I believe we have retired Brevet Lieutenant General Rick Nash and his wife Jeanette here somewhere. Hello, General. State Fire Marshal Jim Smith, Chief Deputy Fire Marshal Amanda Swenson, St. Paul Deputy Fire Chief Ken Adams, St. Paul Police Commander Jack Serrier, Kansayapi Lower Sioux Indian Community Treasurer Dave Morrison, Director of the Minneapolis VA Healthcare System, Pat Kelly, Executive Director of the Veterans Affairs Midwest Healthcare System, Robert McDivitt, and 9/11 and Global War on Terrorism Remembrance Task Force members, retired Lieutenant Colonel Curtis Anderson, Executive Director, Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum, Randall Dietrich, retired Master Sergeant Daniel Ewer, Commander Alan Garber, American Legion Post 290, and retired Command Sergeant Major David Hopkins. We also have with us today the Director, Minnesota Paralyzed Veterans of America, and former Chair of the Minnesota Commanders Task Force, Todd Kemery. I saw him a while ago here. I'm sure Todd's here. Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs Chief of Staff Mike McElhenney, and Navy Commander Roger Reinert. Now, I'm getting a little old and my eyes aren't too good, but I think that's all the dignitaries here today. If I missed somebody, I apologize.
I was talking to my son, and he was a history major at the University of Minnesota, and he said, Dad, buy a notebook and some pencils or pens and write down everything you remember, because I feel honored to have been there, and that sounds really strange, but I'm honored to have been there so I can tell the story, so I can bring credibility to what others have written about. Everybody has a desire, as I did with my World War II Pearl Harbor veteran family member. It's like you want to touch it. People have an overwhelming desire to touch an event if they couldn't be there. And I think I have the privilege of bringing that to people.
I think that the work of the task force is so critically important. We run this risk of really not capturing people's perspectives and missing their stories. And I think it's so important that we as a society really do capture people's experiences and their stories around both September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
You know, I think one of the really challenging things for those of us who have served post 9/11 in the war on terror is there isn't a thing to point to. There's no end. Our peer group spans almost 4 generations now. Completely different experiences, wildly different experiences in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the effort at 20 years to collect stories and tell stories and somehow put that together in a way that makes sense is super important, because now you have a thing that all of us, no matter when we went and what our experience was, can take the people that are important in our lives, who appreciate and support, but don't understand and can't understand because they weren't there.
Our first speaker is the chairperson of the Minnesota 9/11 and Global War on Terrorism Remembrance Task Force, Larry Herke. Larry Herke is the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs and is charged with assisting the state's more than 312,000 veterans and their families. He passionately advocates for our veterans at hearings before the Minnesota Legislature and the United States Congress, and maintains close working relationships with the veteran service organizations of Minnesota. He has served in the Army and the Army National Guard for more than 30 years and is a post-9/11 Operation Iraqi Freedom Combat veteran. As chair of the Minnesota 9/11 Task Force, he has crafted today's event with the intent of being the starting point for our state's year-long effort to preserve, educate, recognize, remember, commemorate, and engage the public about Minnesota's history and sacrifices during 9/11 and the global war on terrorism. Please welcome Commissioner Larry Herke.
Thank you, Tom. And as the host for today's event, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to all the organizations that made today possible. It was an extraordinary effort to bring this together, and I very much appreciate your input and help and assistance with this. I also want to say thank you for those who got up early enough this morning to see us, and those people that are online streaming right now that will be able to see this later on. I'm honored today to represent the 312,000 veterans, and in Minnesota, over 40,000 veterans have served since September 11th, 2001. The generations before us remembered where they were when learning of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, or the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. On September 11th, 2001, most of us can recall where we were, who we were with, and what we were doing when the unbelievable happened. Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 planes. 2 attacked and destroyed the World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York City. A 3rd plane was flown into the Pentagon, causing partial collapse of that building. And the 4th plane crashed into Pennsylvania before it reached its target in Washington, D.C. The world has not been the same since that fateful day. For thousands of Minnesota veterans, their peacetime military service was suddenly thrust into something called the global war on terrorism. I am one of those veterans. Like many who were serving during that time, I realized that my military service would now include defending my country against an enemy described by then President George W. Bush as a radical network of terrorists. In support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, I was deployed for 15 months during a period of 2006 to 2007. I will never forget the smells of the desert, the extreme heat and the fine sand that made it into all your equipment, your vehicles, your billets, and sometimes actually into your food. I was fortunate to return home and to continue my service in the Army National Guard until I retired in 2016. Not all of my fellow Minnesotans were as fortunate. 7 Minnesotans were among those lost in their lives on 9/11, and we witnessed those names earlier today. And over the past 20 years, another 109 Minnesota service members have died in hostile action during the global war on terrorism. We come together today to remember these heroes. Let us never forget their sacrifices. About a year ago, it came to me that we needed to do something on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And I was authorized actually to put together a task force for this reason. And the purpose of the task force, as indicated by Tom, was to preserve, educate, recognize, remember, commemorate, and engage the public about Minnesota's history and sacrifices during 9/11 and the global war on terrorism. The task force not only planned today's event, but they're committed to continuing their work throughout the next year to write the definitive history of the war's impact on Minnesotans and to educate the public about their state's contributions. I would ask at this time, and I know they're spread all over the place, but I would ask the members, some here are here on the stage, I'd ask they stand. These are volunteers that have put in countless hours, and I would appreciate if the audience would give them a round of applause. Thank you. As we just heard a video clip from Navy veteran Roger Reinhardt, it's important that current generations remember 9/11. And especially in light of recent events in Afghanistan, it's even more important to recognize that we accomplished our mission there. We went to Afghanistan after 9/11 to go after those who attacked us. We were successful in that mission. In short, there have been no attacks on the United States in the last 20 years. Al-Qaeda is no longer a threat to us, and Osama bin Laden and most of his leaders are dead. Today, we honor and remember the sacrifices that the service members have made on behalf of our country. I'd like to say thank you to my fellow Minnesotan veterans for your service during the global war on terrorism. I would ask that you take time today or in the next few weeks to reconnect with other veterans who have also served in this war and in previous conflicts. As veterans, we become more resilient when we take time to connect with each other. And to the audience, I want to thank you all for sharing this important day with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Herke. Our next speaker is a valued leader who has transformed the role of first responders since 9/11. Commissioner John Harrington heads the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Prior to his appointment, he served as the Metro Transit Chief of Police and the St. Paul Chief of Police. He has seen firsthand how 9/11 changed the nation and the state, security measures, and posture of first responders. Please welcome Commissioner John Harrington.
Good morning. Those of us of a certain age can remember where we were and what we were doing on the day that President Kennedy was killed. Or for me, in 1968, when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Since that time, there are so many other events that have brought us together as a nation. In awe or in tears, we become one during those events. All of those events, though, were eclipsed exactly 20 years ago on what would be America's darkest day. On that day, Americans of all types, whites and blacks, men and women, Jews, Muslims, Christians, forgot their differences and became one. Today we feel what President Franklin Roosevelt called the warm courage of national unity. This is a unity of every faith and every background. It is evident in services and prayers, candlelight vigils, and American flags displayed with pride. We gather here today to honor and remember the fallen and the heroes whose names are written forever in the history of that terrible day, and to express our gratitude to their families for their sacrifices. Today we pay tribute to the soldiers, to the firefighters, to the sailors, to the peace officers, to the airmen and the medics who gave their lives in the line of duty. Colors have been presented, wreaths will be laid, candles lit, and black bands appear across badges. The reason for these ceremonies is so simple. It's written on the hearts of all of us who've ever worn the shield or the star, or who has lost someone, and it can be summed up in 3 simple words. Lest we forget. Lest we forget their smiles. Lest we forget their passion. Lest we forget their dreams. Lest we forget their devotion. "74 cops went end of tour on 9/11. 343 firefighters made their final run that day. Their names shall never be forgotten. They are the names of people who faced death and in their last moments called home to say, 'Be brave, and I love you.' They're the names of passengers who defied their murderers and prevented murders of others on the ground. They're the names of men and women who wore uniforms and died doing their duty. There are so many stories of heroism from 9/11. EMS personnel, firefighters, peace officers, and ordinary citizens pitching in to save others. Firefighters rushing to the scene, heat from the flames so hot that literally the earth and the girders of the building turned liquid. And yet they went up. Up 10 flights of stairs, and the heat's rising, up 20 more flights of stairs into a darkness, and yet they rose. Searching for that next victim, searching for those survivors until that awful moment when the foundation gave way and all was lost. I remember hearing from a Port Authority cop that I knew out of New York who told me the story of Father Michael Judge, the New York fire chaplain, who kneeling on the ground in the tower took his helmet off to minister to one of the fallen and then lost his own life as the towers came crashing down. If 9/11 had a motto, it would probably be, "Let's roll." That's what Thomas Burnett Jr. and Todd Beamer, husbands, fathers, and heroes, said to the others aboard Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. They decided to act. They decided that they would fight, even if their own lives would be forfeit. I think it's sobering to think that when Thomas Burnett Jr. and his fellow passengers boarded Flight 93 that morning, they had no idea that the bell had sounded and that they would be called upon to be heroes. And yet they rose to the occasion, as ordinary Americans have always risen. In closing, I call upon all of us to remember the ones who 9/11 took from us, and to never forget the sacrifices that they made. To my brothers and sisters in service, I challenge each of you to live each day as if it were your last one, without fear, prepared to leave nothing on the field but the legacy of your bravery, your honor, and and your love for those we serve. These heroes and all the other casualties of 9/11 gave us the ultimate gift, and we are better for having known of them and then their sacrifices. And for those of us who stand here today, let us celebrate the life of these heroes by carrying on their legacy in our lives. Let us commit ourselves to take action. As the poet Horace once put it, carpe diem, or more fittingly, as Thomas Burnett Jr. put it, make something happen. Let's roll. May God bless all of you, the state of Minnesota, and the United States of America. Thank you.
What I can tell you is, shortly following the Twin Towers incident and the Pentagon incident, they had grounded all aviation nationwide. And at one time, it was thought that Gopher 6 was the only airplane flying. At one time, it probably was in the United States. Short of, there may have been other assets in the air, but we weren't privy to that, nor should we have been. But our being there did make a difference in that we were that mobile satellite, eyes in the sky, that was able to give the strategic planners and assessment team what they needed when they needed it, so they could immediately do what was necessary to defend the nation.
I actually joined the Army on September 10th, 2001. And then that was kind of how my journey began. I felt the urge to get out and be part of something bigger and greater than myself. I remember very clearly September 11th, I was in my kitchen and my dad called me and he was very concerned. And he asked me if, are you okay? Is everything okay? And I'm like, I don't know why you're even. And then I saw on the news what was going on. And that was probably one of the most sobering moments of my entire life. I knew that I had just joined the service and that what was going on right now was going to directly impact my journey. They asked the trainees and they said, well, now who wants to join the airborne group? And it was just dead silent in the room. And so I was like, we're going to do this.
Thank you, Commissioner Harrington. Our next speaker is a leader, motivator, and connector. She belongs to an organization that no one seeks to be inducted into, our Gold Star families. Jill Stephenson's only child, her son, Army Ranger Corporal Ben Kopp, served our nation with determination and pride and was killed by enemy fire in Afghanistan in 2009. Jill has shared Ben's triumphant spirit with countless audiences and has been an empowering and warm light to other Gold Star families. Please welcome one of my favorite Gold Star mothers, Jill Stephenson.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. If you would have told me 20 years and 1 day ago that I would be speaking to a crowd at the state capitol about my son in the year 2021, I would have been hard-pressed to wonder why. But the 24 hours that transpired from September 10th to September 11th, 2001, altered my life and stole away a future I couldn't see. September 11th, 2001 would become the driving force behind my only child's destiny. Coupled with the death of his great-grandfather 5 months earlier, the terrorist attack on America lit a directional beacon in Ben that would become his true north, something that he would never look away from. My grandfather was a World War II veteran who served with the 34th Infantry Division Red Bulls right here in Minnesota. Because I was a single mother to Ben, my grandfather was the strongest male role model that Ben knew. They were very close. We were fortunate that the two of them got to spend a lot of time together. Ben idolized him and truly worshiped the ground that he walked on. He wanted to grow up and be just like him, and he told my grandfather that. My grandfather, in his infinite wisdom, told Ben that imitation is not flattery, kid. That one day you're going to get a gut feeling of your own that's going to give you the direction of where you want to go and what you're meant to be. Ben said, "Okay, Grandpa, when I grow up, I still want to be just like you." I've done a lot of public speaking over the last 12 years, and I learned over time to not write speeches. I felt it was more appropriate to speak from the heart. But I write myself notes and bullet points and quotes that I don't want to forget. And I had everything done last night until I watched the documentary that was on called Resolute. It was very wonderfully done. For those of you that watched it, I have no doubt that you agree with me. But what watching that documentary did to me last night is it wrecked my heart all over again. It brought me back to the point in time when I sat with my 13-year-old son in his bedroom, glued to the television and watching the horror that was taking place on American soil, listening to the death count go higher and higher. Those memories and those pictures are burned into my brain, as they are for many of us. I happen to have a little bit of a photographic memory. When I see things, I can't unsee them. I felt Ben's pain. I watched my 13-year-old teenage boy change from being incredibly sad and lost in the deep sorrow of losing his great-grandfather 5 months earlier to becoming full of anger and a strong sense of revenge. 9/11 was personal to him. It mocked his great-grandfather's service to America. He made a vow on that day that he was going to make someone pay and that he was going to protect the world from that ever happening again. Standing here 20 years later, the big question is, have we forgotten? I haven't. 9/11 stole my son's future. His life book ended at year 21. But not before he gave up his future to make the world better for people halfway across the globe and for the 6 men that were fighting the Taliban at his side who would credit Ben with saving their futures. I always supported Ben joining the military, despite people questioning my willingness to allow him to do that since he was my only child. He spoke with such conviction on 9/11 that I knew it was his destiny, and I could not stand in the way of what he was meant to become. Even now, 12 years later, I am more proud of him than I ever thought possible, and I still miss him terribly. On the very first Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery in 1868, future President James Garfield spoke of the dead who had paid the ultimate price for freedom. He said, "For love of country, they accepted death and thus resolved all doubts and made immortal their patriotism and virtue." I know this to be true of my son, and I can't imagine it's not the same for each of the other Minnesotans killed in action whose names we have spoken today. While our American forces were officially withdrawn from Afghanistan just under 2 weeks ago, tragically, 13 more names were added to the list of casualties who died defending freedom and democracy in this 20-year war. To all of those families, please accept my condolences. Additionally, my condolences go out to every other Gold Star and 9/11 surviving families that are here with us today. It hasn't been pointed out yet, but there's a VIP section right over yonder of the Gold Star families and surviving 9/11 family members. If we could just take a moment and honor them one more time for being here today in honor of their loved ones. Thank you. Thank you, each and every one of you. We are a part of a group that no one ever wanted to become a part of. But because we were brought together by the sacrifices of our loved ones, we've become a new family. And their family I wouldn't trade for anything. I will never stop praying for any of those families, for any of us that have suffered losses because of 9/11. And I will never, ever forget. I can't. My heart won't let me. God bless every one of you here, and God bless these United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. And thank you to all of our Gold Star families for sharing your children with all of us in service to our nation. If you were alive 20 years ago, you undoubtedly watched the horrific sequence of events unfold on television. You prayed in those uncertain minutes and hours and days that the many victims of these terrorist acts would be spared. Few of us have the perspective of our next speaker. Mariah Jacobsen's father, Bloomington native Tom Burnett, was on one of the flights that was hijacked that day. Moreover, he was on Flight 93, the flight where he and other passengers counterattacked the hijackers and averted a fourth and final attack on our seat of government. Please welcome 9/11 surviving family member Mariah Jacobsen.
Good morning. My life changed on September 11th, 2001. I didn't know it at the time, but I felt it. You see, while I sat in my high school classroom, my father was engaged in a fight for his life and a fight for the future of our nation. At the time, however, I had no idea that the deep ache I was feeling in my heart was for a man I'd met as an infant, but would never see again. A man whose blood pumped through my veins, a man who would change the way I live my life forever. I was born to Tom Burnett Jr. and my birth mother on January 31st, 1985. Though my father was present at my birth and visited me in foster care, he and my birth mother decided they were not ready to be parents, and I was adopted through a closed process by two loving parents and grew up here in St. Paul. But from that date on, my father and I thought of each other often, though we were physically separated and did not know each other's names. Regardless, in my heart of hearts, I knew we were destined to connect one day. Unfortunately, however, our physical connection was not meant to be, at least not in this lifetime. When I finally learned my father's name, I gained him and lost him all over again in an instant. On my birth certificate was the name Thomas Edward Burnett Jr., not only a brave man who had, along with several other passengers, heroically thwarted a fourth attack on September 11th, but also my long-lost, long-loved father. In that moment, the ache I'd felt in my heart on September 11th returned. In fact, I realized in an instant that the ache in my heart was actually a hole, one that would be there for the rest of my life. I began to desperately rack my brain, hoping I'd miraculously recall a fleeting moment from my infancy in which he had held me just so I could remember his face looking at mine. It's probably no surprise then that in the days, weeks, and months immediately following my discovery, I felt lost. I felt connected to my father, but in a strange, grief-stricken way that I could not easily articulate. How could I honor my father's formidable legacy? How could I ensure that when we eventually met again, he'd be proud of the life I'd lived? Most especially, how could I possibly keep my father's memory alive when the only memories I had of him were secondhand memories? The answers to these questions were not immediately apparent to me. So I set out to learn as much about my father and his final moments as possible. And over time, I realized that I could memorialize my father and his fellow United 93 passengers by living a purposeful life, inspired by their actions on September 11th. To that end, I would like to share 3 lessons learned from the United 93 passengers that I hold close to my heart today. The passengers on United 93 were mostly strangers when they boarded their ill-fated flight on September 11th. However, when faced with certain death, they banded together to avert a bigger crisis. Politics, religion, race, none of that mattered when lives were on the line. Lesson number 1, the people in your life are there for a reason. Be kind. We're all stronger together than we are divided. During the hijacking, the United 93 passengers quickly deduced that they were part of a larger, calculated suicide mission. Rather than waiting for others to intervene, the United 93 passengers took immediate action. They began gathering information from loved ones, and they began assembling any weapons they could find. On one of his last phone calls to my stepmother, Dina, my father said not to worry, that he and a group of passengers were going to do something. Lesson number 2, it's up to us to change course when necessary. When a wrong needs to be righted, we must act swiftly and decisively. Lastly, although there were many acts of bravery on 9/11, the heroes aboard United 93 punched back at a moment when many of us feared that perhaps our country had been knocked down for good. The United 93 passengers did whatever was necessary to ensure their plane never reached its intended target. Lesson number 3, even in our darkest hours, there is light. Even when things seem hopeless, there is hope. And our country is never knocked out of the fight. 20 years ago, 19 murders robbed nearly 3,000 families like mine of opportunity, the chance to explore connections and celebrate milestones. But the terrorists on 9/11 could not steal our resolve. They could not steal our hope. They could not steal the legacy of our Minnesota heroes who did us proud on 9/11 and in the 20 years that followed. I still ask God to send Tom to me in a dream, just so I can see him again. I still look for signs of him in myself and in my kids. But even if I can't see him, I can feel him. Each time I need to muster an extra ounce of courage, or whenever I'm struggling to find light in the darkness, I feel his encouraging hand on my shoulder. Whether you knew any of the brave Minnesotans who perished over the last 20 years or not, I hope you'll leave here today inspired to be a beacon of light on our country's darkest days. I hope you're able to find the humanity in your fellow citizens. And when faced with the choice, I hope you'll choose to do something. Thank you.
Mariah, thank you for those lessons that you've shared with us today. And now, in honor of those 9/11 and Gold Star families, a patriotic interlude performed by the Minnesota Army National Guard's Arden Hills Base 34 Red Bull Infantry Band. Thank you to our 34th Infantry Division Red Bull Band. Our keynote speaker is among the most distinguished military leaders to call Minnesota home. A St. Paul native, retired General Joseph Votel was among the first Army Rangers to parachute into Afghanistan in October of 2001. His accomplished career led him to multiple command assignments, including the 4-star commander of 2 consecutive Unified Combatant Commands, U.S. Special Operations Command, overseeing all Special Operation Forces in the military, and U.S. Central Command, leading all U.S. service members in the Mideast. Please welcome our own General Joseph Votel.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Tom. I did grow up in St. Paul. In fact, on those heights right over there, overlooking the river. And I went to a high school about 3 miles up the road here. And after graduating from West Point, I met a girl that lived about 4 miles over there. And together we got married at a church about 6 blocks from here. And I tell you all that to just tell you how proud I am to be standing here in front of you this morning with these distinguished Minnesotans and with all of you to recognize this very important commemoration of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Along my path, I had the opportunity to serve our nation in a variety of ways, to include in the intensified period since the attacks of September 11th, 2001. On that fateful day, I was serving as the commander of the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, an elite, commando-like force of triple volunteers who represented the cutting edge of our national military response capability. I was very fortunate to lead our initial operations into southern Afghanistan, which commenced with a parachute assault into the Rajasthan desert of Helmand province on the evening of October 19th, 2001. I still remember the feeling as we boarded our aircraft with still fresh memories of the images of that very bright morning in September. Each of us, all of the Rangers that filled those aircraft, were filled with an element of trepidation because we understood what was at stake: the honor of our nation and the protection of our citizens. But with that trepidation was a healthy dose of pride and patriotism, knowing that what we were about to do was both right and just. A lot has happened since that evening, and a lot of it has been good. And as we've seen over the last few weeks, some of it has not been good. There are literally thousands of stories that can be told about this 20-year period. I would like to talk with you about 3 of them this morning. First, there is the story of the beginning, the horrific attacks that killed nearly 3,000 of our own fellow citizens in their workplaces or as they went about their normal daily activities. This story, of course, is the cornerstone of why we gather here this morning. It is an important one to remember because it reminds us that despite the many blessings of our country, our citizens can be vulnerable in the most benign settings. It teaches us that we must always be vigilant and prepared to defend ourselves and our way of life. And it also reminds us that the world is an incredibly complex, dynamic, and small place. Things that happen in seemingly far-off locations can impact us here at home. We can choose to engage or not engage, but it is clear that whatever that decision we take, we must have a strategy that each and every American citizen can understand and support. Second, there is the story at the end, punctuated by the sad events of the last several weeks in Afghanistan, which have played out once again in tragic images that we have all witnessed. This story seems to be a conclusion, but I'm not so sure. We still have American citizens and Afghan partners in peril who will require our assistance. And Afghanistan is poised again to be a platform from which terrorist organizations can attack us and our friends, cause instability, and perpetuate their toxic narrative. This too is an important story because it reminds us that the best intentions do not always lead to the best outcomes. It also reminds us that as powerful and capable as our military and our nation truly is, it is often the intangibles that determine strategic outcomes. And it highlights to us that with power comes responsibility and the need to understand, to choose wisely, to persevere when necessary, and endure when it is appropriate. And it teaches us that in the complex world of 2021, winning will often have a different connotation than we may have applied in the past. But in between these two stories of the beginning and the end is a third story that I believe is the most important one. It is a story about those who stood up and played their role when the nation called. They fought back aboard hijacked aircraft. They willingly plunged into an inflamed Pentagon to rescue their comrades. They dug with their hands in the wreckage of the Twin Towers to recover their neighbors. They lined up to give blood in the hope that they could contribute to saving a life. They formed citizen cordons for firemen, police, and service members making their final lonely journey home, and then cared for their grieving families and helped raise their children. They greeted soldiers returning from long deployments. They deployed honorably and nobly in far-flung locations on multiple occasions. And in situation after situation, they stepped forward and did their duty, often at the cost of their lives. These are the in-between stories. And it is here where we learn about the heroism of a young Ben Kopp, who willingly advances into enemy fire to protect his team, becoming mortally wounded in the process. It is here that we see the values of empathy, integrity, selflessness, and sacrifice for the common good that we all embrace here as Minnesotans and Midwesterners, and was so well exemplified by Tom Burnett. It is here that we see the better angels of ourself rising to the challenge that the moments present. And it is here that I hope you will spend most of your time when commemorating this solemn event. I think it is essential for Americans to appreciate this point, especially now against a cacophony of voices suggesting that these sacrifices may have been in vain. They have not been. Their service and sacrifice mattered then, and it matters now. We cannot allow the story of the beginning or the ending to overtake or diminish the stories in between. I think we must always view service and sacrifice in the context in which it is rendered. I'm proud to be a Minnesotan standing here among many Minnesotans, especially on this anniversary, as we hear more and more about the in-between stories of our friends and neighbors as they stood up and answered the nation's call. We have all learned a lot over the last 20 years, and undoubtedly we will learn more. As Americans, we always do, even if it takes us time to do so. But I hope the lessons that we internalize and replicate the most are the stories in between. That is certainly what I am thinking today. Thank you, and God bless America.
Thank you, General Votel, for those powerful words and some things for us to contemplate for the rest of our lives. Congressman Betty McCollum has served as Minnesota's 4th District Representative since being elected in 2000. She is on the House Appropriations Committee, where she serves as Chair of the Defense Subcommittee, Vice Chair of the Interior Environment Subcommittee, and as a member of the Agricultural and Rural Development Subcommittee. Congressman McCollum is also a member of the House Natural Resources Committee. Please welcome Representative Betty McCollum.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee who made this gathering happen. Good to see you, Governor, to my sister senators, to you, General, who has been a touchstone in my office and continue to be so, thank you. For our distinguished guests, especially our 2 Gold Star families who shared with us today. Gold Star families who have borne the greatest sacrifice. It is an honor, it is a privilege to be with you. On this, the 20th anniversary of 9/11 attacks, as has been pointed out, an entire generation of Americans has lived in a world shaped by the threat of terrorism. 20 years ago, I was in the place I stayed at in Washington, D.C. I had the Today Show on. I saw the first plane hit the Twin Towers and thought, how could that be? I walked the 2 blocks into my office, where my staff was watching the second plane. It just hit the building. It was a beautiful day. The sun was out. I decided my office, we should just go across the street. There's a little green area like what's right behind us. And I thought we need to talk about what's happened. We need to understand what's happened and what we can do to be supportive. As we walked outside, people were looking in the direction of the Pentagon. And we saw the smoke. And I knew that this was going to be much bigger for our country than I realized. Then we heard of the flight, United Flight 93, the passengers taking it down in Pennsylvania, because it was coming for our nation's capital. I reflect on those days often, and today, especially. We remember the victims today. We hold their families and the first responders. We hold them in our prayers, and they will never be forgotten in our hearts and minds. More than 40,000 Minnesotans have served our nation in uniform. And I went to far too many funerals during that time. Our U.S. service members, our diplomatic corps, our intelligence officers risked their lives every day to defend our freedom. It is our job collectively to make sure that they have the tools and the training to get the job done and to come home to their families. I want to take a second just to speak of the soldiers and airmen of the Minnesota National Guard. They're serving across our country and around the world. I've had the opportunity to be in theater with many of them. And now their mission is assisting with the newly arrived Afghan refugees. And I know they will do a tremendous job. And even here at home, as we face another terror, COVID-19, our National Guard is protecting us. They are the citizen soldiers, along with those who raise their hand and volunteer to serve. So on this day, I want to thank them as we reflect on our values and our principles in our U.S. Constitution: freedom, liberty, and equality, and the commitment to stay united and to resist attack on our nation. It's more important than ever that we stand together as Americans in our shared commitment of freedom and democracy. We did so on September 11th. Under the advice of Capitol Police, members got the message out. There was no phone service in Washington, D.C. for most of the day. But we got the message out, and we stood on our nation's capital because we wanted to know those who attacked us, we were there, and we were ready to fight back. We need that kind of spirit again. So, as the 1st Regiment, Minnesota's 1st Infantry Regiment did, the very first group of volunteers to serve our Union in the Civil War, I want you to know that we collectively, we thank you for serving our country, our nation, our community, and that you have our gratitude and our support. For those of you who have given the ultimate sacrifice, and for those missing in action, we will never forget you. We will never forget your families, and we will work to honor you. May God bless us. May God bless us all. May God watch over those who serve our country.
Thank you, Representative McCollum. Senator Tina Smith has served the United States Senate since 2018. She's on the Senate's Committee on Agricultural, Nutrition, and Forestry, the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, as well as the Committee on Indian Affairs. Please welcome Senator Tina Smith.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everybody. I am so grateful to be with you all today and to reflect on the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And I'd like to particularly thank Mariah and Jill for your stories, for sharing the personal nature of your loss, and to lift us up with the hope that you continue to bring to the story of 9/11. So we come together today to remember this tragic event and to honor all of those who lost their lives that terrible day, and to recognize our service members and veterans and public servants and firefighters and peace officers and their families, all who have given so much to our nation on 9/11 and on every day since. September 11th, 2001 is one of those days that we cannot forget, we will not forget, a demarcation point where everything that came before is completely different from everything that came after. That Tuesday, I had dropped our sons, Sam and Mason, off at school and was driving to my precinct to vote in the primary that day. I had the radio on and I was thinking about the election and about the kids and what I needed to get done that day. And then the news broke over the radio that something had happened in New York City, that one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center had been hit by a plane. And it was impossible to make sense of it. And over the course of that morning, the terrible truth of that terrorist attack on our country in New York, at the Pentagon, and ultimately the terrible plane crash of 9/11, it all became clear. And the tragedy and the unfathomable loss gradually emerged from the dust and the flames. And what I remember about that time is that we were all together. We were experiencing the same loss. We were desperately trying to find out who was safe and who was lost, and searching for ways to explain this to our children, what it all meant. I remember feeling a powerful sense of determination to do something, to be useful. And in that moment, for me, that meant helping to comfort my friend Mary, whose son was lost when the towers came down. But in the days and the months and the years after, I know that many of us have continued to try to continue to figure how to be useful, how to do something that is meaningful in the face of that terrible tragedy and that attack. Each of us have stories of that day and how it changed us, what it gave us, as well as what it so cruelly took away. I have been thinking a lot about how this is lived by our veterans and our Gold Star families and public servants who have given so much over the last 20 years fighting terrorism in Afghanistan and around the globe. I've been thinking about these individuals for which this story continues. For these Americans, I know that it is especially hard to reflect on the legacy of 9/11 20 years later. So I am very grateful that the war in Afghanistan, our longest war, has concluded. And for the first time since 2001, no U.S. service members are risking their lives there. Yet we know that this fight is not over. So today, let us mark 9/11 by remembering those who have lost so much that fateful day. And also, let us honor those who have served and sacrificed over all of the last 20 years. My thoughts are with the Gold Star families and the thousands who have made the ultimate sacrifice. This selfless sacrifice and heroism has made us all safer, and this service has not been in vain. We are a grateful nation. And though the last of the American service members have left Afghanistan, veterans still carry the scars, both visible and invisible, of their service. So today, let us recommit ourselves to making sure that these veterans have the benefits and the care that they have earned through their service, including mental health care. I am so grateful to have spent the time with all of you today, and I will not forget the lessons that Mariah shared with us, that we are stronger together, that it is up to us to act when action is required, and that even in our darkest moments, we can find hope, and that we are never knocked out as Americans. Thank you so much to all of you. Peace be with you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Amy Klobuchar was elected to the United States Senate in 2006. She's on the Senate's Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the Judiciary Committee, the Joint Economic Committee, and she chairs the Committee on Rules and Administration. She's a busy lady. Please welcome Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, and thank you for being the voice, not just on Veterans Day and Memorial Day, but for our veterans out there in our military. And I want to thank the governor, a veteran himself, for hosting us today, gathering us at the People's House. I want to thank my dear friend, Senator Smith, and Congresswoman McCollum for their leadership. General, thank you for all you have done for our country. And our distinguished guests. Today, Minnesotans join with all Americans in remembering that terrible day 20 years ago when our nation was attacked. We remember those who were killed. We remember those left behind who continue to grieve. We heard Mariah's words, loving daughter. Her dad, a passenger on that flight. His fateful words, "We're going to do something," ring in our ears even now. And Mariah, your father's bravery is an inspiration to all of us. We also remember the three other Minnesotans that we lost that day. Gary Keckler and Gordon Amith, who were working in the South Tower. We remember Max Bilkey. Max was from Alexandria, Minnesota, and he fought in Korea. And as the general knows, he was the last combat soldier to leave Vietnam. And after that, he actually came back and served in the Pentagon working on veterans' health care. And he was working in the Pentagon that day when the plane hit. We lost him. And a few years ago, we named the VA clinic proudly the Max Bilkey VA Clinic in Alexandria in his memory. And Jill, I'm remembering the funeral for Ben, and I'm remembering all those young people and the tears and the memories and your strength. He made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. And all of our prayers, as has been mentioned, are with the families and loved ones of our military and those who lost their lives or were wounded in Kabul last month. We will never forget their sacrifice. Today, as John Harrington so beautifully put it, we remember those brave first responders who stood with us. We all remember that day. I remember the blue sky as I dropped our daughter, John is here with me today, our daughter off at school. I remember her hand, first grader, she walked in that door. I remember going to our neighbors to drop something off, and it was a neighbor, a friend from our church, and she was glued to the TV. That's when I first saw it. And she said, my husband, his best friend, is a firefighter in New York. They later find out that he, John, was one of the over 300 killed that day, firefighter. I remember going into the Hennepin County Government Center, making decisions about what we were going to do, and I remember the employees there, grace under pressure. We said, you guys can go. They said, no, we have a job, and we're going to finish it. That same blue sky, that was the blue sky in New York City. That was the blue sky in Washington, D.C. That was the blue sky in Pennsylvania. those passengers that saved so many lives on Tom Burnett's flight. When suddenly the world changed, the sky changed, black smoke clouded the skies over New York and Washington and Pennsylvania, cast a shadow over all of America, really over the world. Shock, sadness, panic and dread, fear and vulnerability, anger and outrage. But in the end, there was also this pride at the courage and sacrifice of our firefighters and police officers and rescue workers. Pride, General and Commissioner, in our extraordinary military. Feelings of patriotism. Young people like Benjamin Cobb felt that urge to defend our country in his great-grandpa's name, felt that urge to protect our fellow citizens, to ensure that our fundamental values of freedom and democracy remain safe, to rebuild. And there was love. I saw the Canadian General was here. I remember Canada, this huge thing they did in New York City. There was love around the world, wanting to hug a child. The Al-Qaeda terrorists, by turning 4 passenger jets into missiles, were seeking not only to make a hole in American soil, they wanted to put a hole in America's soul. Well, we know they did not succeed. We are still a great nation. We are still strong, and we still shine bright as the world's beacon of freedom and democracy. Today, we are much better prepared and more vigilant than we were 20 years ago. We gather today to honor the citizens, workers, mothers, and fathers, to honor our heroes. We honor them not just in words, but as Congresswoman McCollum said, in how we support them going forward and how we make sure they have the best of the best. Although time may pass, let us never forget them. And let us honor their memories by cherishing our country and the values we share as Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. It's my honor to introduce our final speaker, who's been waiting patiently for his turn, the Governor of Minnesota. Governor Walz was instrumental in establishing the 9/11 Task Force to ensure that Minnesotans have the tools to preserve, educate, recognize, remember, commemorate, and engage the public about the Minnesota's history and sacrifices during 9/11 and the global war on terrorism. Our governor is a 24-year veteran in the National Guard and deployed overseas in the wake of 9/11 with the Minnesota National Guard at the rank of Command Sergeant Major to support security efforts at American and Allied bases abroad. As Minnesota's first congressional district representative, he was the highest-ranking enlisted soldier to ever serve in Congress and served as the ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. As governor, he remains a tireless advocate for military families, service members, and veterans. Please welcome the Minnesota National Guard's Commander-in-Chief, our Governor, Tim Walz.
Thank you. Thank you all. Tom, thank you, and I want to echo Senator Klobuchar's thanks. There's no one embodies the decency, the empathy, and the commitment to our veterans like Tom Lyon does, not just on this day, but on every day. To our distinguished guests, to the senators and Congresswoman McCollum, thank you for being the servant leaders, for serving the people, standing up, and for making sure that Minnesota's values are taken to Washington. General Votel, you're a treasure. You are the son of St. Paul. We are proud, and your time in service and your words today echo to our better angels. They echo to a reality that all of us shouldn't be afraid to face, but should do it that Americans do, that we're able to take those on and look for the truth and look for those better angels. So thank you. To Commissioner Herke and to the entire team, and I want to thank our legislators who are here, this endeavor to make sure that we do remember we do learn. We do spend the time necessary to understanding what September 11th meant, both in the moment, individually and collectively, and what it means going forward. Today is the beginning of a year-long exploration of that. And I just want to say that vision and that foresight and creating this space for us to gather as community is critically important for understanding what happened. So thank you for that. Commissioner Harrington, thank you for your long service and your inspirational words. And to those families who lost loved ones on 9/11, and to our Gold Star families, it's far more than a cliche. It's a fundamental truth of this nation. No one holds a more honored place in our society. Quite honestly, people don't quite know what to do when they see you. There's a sense of reverence. There's a sense of empathy. There's a sense of guilt that they're not in your position and your families are enduring that. But whenever you are present, everyone else is present. They are focused on the moment and they are focused on your story. This remembrance is about telling the stories. So thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you for that. To our first responders, you've heard it time and time again. We talk about the names, and those names are countless. We talk about the big and the small acts of heroism, but each and every day, there are Minnesotans and Americans that go to work in jobs that put them in harm's way simply so that we can enjoy peace and the freedom that billions of people around the world can never even dream of having. And they do it without expectations of parades. They do it without expectations of anything. They do it out of the sense and the best of who we are. So for each and every one of you, thank you. To each of you who came, for some reason, you woke up or planned and said, I'm going to go down to the Capitol and I'm going to sit by my neighbors and I'm going to reflect for a couple of hours of what happened. I can't pretend to know what would motivate each of you to do that, but I have a pretty strong feeling it's like all of us, and myself included, I spent this last week and from time to time thinking about what has happened in those 20 years. And I think it's natural to view your own personal journey of what happened to you, but it's also the broader, we are not an island. We are amongst others. We're amongst our fellow Minnesotans and our fellow Americans. So as you're setting today, I'm guessing just like I was, and I appreciate Jill saying that, to be present in the moment and listen to what people say can change the way you're going to think about things. And I think of all those emotions I went through: fear, anger, confusion, hope, pride, a desire to get revenge, guilt, all of the things that we went through. I think for me, on that fateful morning, the sun was shining about like this. I was sitting in room 114 at Mankato West High School right before school started. And on a typical American and Minnesota high school, the noise in the halls, and it was a new school year. Kids were coming in and setting, and the TV was on. And those events started to unfold, and that room got fuller and fuller, and quiet, and tears, and fear, and confusion. Those 15 and 16-year-olds are now in their 30s, and like Mariah, they have children. And for those of you who chose to bring children today, thank you. Thank you for taking it and understanding. As we get further from events, our memories fade, both individually and collectively, and it becomes harder to tell that story. And in the years that happened after that classroom, I had the privilege of serving in this state's National Guard. And when I left, I had a 2-year-old. When I came home, I had a 3-year-old. But as I listened to Jill and I listened to Mariah, the guilt, I came home and my daughter went on. And when you're 2 and 3, she knew no difference. That's not true for some. They can't do that. And over the preceding years of watching us, and as our nation changed and as our political systems became more more difficult for all of us to understand? I stood one night in the dark of night on the tarmac at Bagram and watched a military ramp ceremony. And if you've seen it, which these folks, many have, unfortunately, you don't leave the same. And it makes you wonder, what are we doing? What are we trying to get to? And then watching, as all of you, of the confusing last few weeks. So for all of my 40,000 fellow veterans, and for those were the times just since 9/11 and all those who served. As you heard folks up here speak, it was this state that volunteered first when the nation was most at peril. So from Gettysburg to Kabul, Minnesotans have been there, and they've done what was asked of them. And in this day of remembrance, I got the chance yesterday to speak pretty extensively with former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, George Casey, who served during this time. And he and I reflected on the horrors of what happened. People will reflect on those moments, and I think General Votel was right, the beginning and the end. It was the middle. It was the middle that mattered. It was the sacrifices that mattered. And one of the things that, again, I'm going to echo and incredibly encouraged that all of you understand this, lest us not for 1 minute believe that any of these sacrifices were in vain. These service members, those 40,000 Minnesotans, they changed the world for the better. Some in small ways, some in profound ways. And I also want to say they learned from the generation before them, especially our Vietnam veterans, who said, never again will this nation, our veterans, forget the next generation of veterans. It was because of that commitment that America learned to separate the war from the warrior. You don't have to agree with the political decisions that were made, but you dang sure better understand that those folks who raise their hand will do what's asked of them. The onus of those decisions falls on someone else. And I'll tell you what they did. They said, we're not going to have folks come home and not get everything that we need to do for them. In Lincoln's second inaugural address, he made it clear, we have a sacred responsibility for care for those who've borne the battle and those widows and widowers and orphans that are left behind. Because of that, they transformed the care for veterans, and right here in Minnesota, the flagship of the VA healthcare system, one of 4 polytrauma centers, not only is the best VA system in the country, it is one of the best hospital systems in the world. That is because veterans deserved nothing less, and this generation asked for it to happen, made it happen. And so when you think of asking in vain, there were changes like that of how we approached this, how we viewed service members, how we said thank you for your service, how we made sure that we continued to improve and give care. But you heard, and it was about protecting this nation from those who wished to bring harm, from the cowardly act of terrorism that brought the deaths of nearly 3,000 Americans and plunged the world into the chaos that followed. But every single day, we weren't just protecting ourselves and our families, we were protecting countless families that we'll never know. There were little girls that for a generation went to school and enjoyed the peaceful freedoms that we maybe sometimes take for granted because Minnesotans who did not come home put themselves on the line so they could do that. Those are our values. That's who we share. So I think of when I view a personal journey in each of you and the Gold Star families, to those of you who came today, just asking for us to be smart and don't get involved in wars until we have a plan to end them, all of those things. There's a whole spectrum of thoughts here. But what I would leave you with today, for whatever drove you to come to this remembrance ceremony, you came to do it in community. And for those of us of a certain age, if you remember of all the horror and the tragedy and the confusion that happened in the days after September 11th, neighbors you never saw put a flag out, put their flags out. We watched baseball games where first pitches were shown and everyone paused and understood. We were united. I'm not saying we all thought the same. I'm not saying we all agreed on anything, but we understood the things that united us were far greater than those that divided us. And at least for a few brief hours today, you've chosen to come down here today and maybe get that feeling back. And I would just ask each and every one of us for those sacrifices that have been made from Gettysburg and beyond by Minnesotans. As you heard, and I think Mariah put so clearly, it's our responsibility to live our lives with dignity, with empathy, with passion, with commitment, not just to ourselves and our own personal journey, but to our neighbors. And that's the lesson as I think and we reflect over this year, the positives that came out of this horrific, senseless terrorist attack. There are many of those things that have made us stronger and better. And we get the opportunity here in Minnesota over this next year. Let's continue to work to that one unified place. So to our Gold Star families, no words will ease your pain, but you have the gratitude of all Minnesotans. To each of you who came, thank you. I know there's folks reflecting at home, but gathering in this space sends a little bit different message. So may God bless each of you, the great state of Minnesota, and the great United States. Thank you.
I missed the Guard. I missed the Minnesota Guard. I missed that sense that we're a part of every community. Everybody knows where the Armory is in their hometown. Everybody knows where the Armory is because that's where there's an art show or a gymnastics event or a gathering or a community event. And I miss that sense of community because the Guard is family. My dad was in, my sister was in, I'm in. My uncle was Air Guard. Guard is family, and it resides in the community. And I missed having someplace to call home. On active duty, you don't go home. You just go back to base. You just go back to the post, fort, camp, where you're assigned. When you're in the Minnesota Guard, you get to go home.
When you spend 16 to 18 hours a day with anybody in adverse conditions at war, you become very close with somebody. We became that close as a brotherhood.
This is my brother from another mother, Paul Brown. Disregard the English language, my English better than him. Disregard the age, but he's my brother.
So when I got back to the United States, Philip did everything he could for me to return home to my family. I wanted to make sure that he would be able to make it here safely with his.
We are lucky because we taste the bad life and now we're tasting the great life. America, it's a great country. But the country, it's not just land and sky. The country is land, sky, and people. People make it great.
A little more work to do, sir. Thank you, Governor Walz. For our speakers up on the stage, you haven't had the opportunity to see what's going on, but this morning, early this morning before dark, the Minneapolis and St. Paul Fire Department came over and hung the flag of the United States of America. Well, the wind has changed it into something that I've been told looks like a dove, perhaps. We're going to release some of those soon. Or perhaps an angel. Governor was talking about our angels. Or maybe it's just a sign of the cross and that the Lord is looking over our Gold Star families. Governor, I would invite you, Congressman McCollum, and Commissioner Harrington to join the wreath-laying party. And if you'd go out this way and down the steps on this side, you can join them. They'll be back with us soon. The ancient tradition of laying a wreath is a tribute to those who have passed as a meaningful demonstration of respect and honor. To all here today, if you are able, please stand as we honor those who have died since 9/11 in service to our armed forces, law enforcement, firefighters, emergency medical workers, Allied international citizens, and U.S. citizens. Our wreath presentation will be accompanied by, it will not be accompanied, please remain standing after the wreath laying as we will offer our final acts of remembrance in the form of a rifle volley, the playing of taps, and the release of doves symbolizing Minnesota's strength, perseverance, commitment, and unity as we honor and remember the events of 20 years ago today. In memory of U.S. Armed Forces killed in action since 9/11, a wreath is being presented by Gold Star parents Rick and Terry Clark, whose son, Army Specialist Ryan Clark, was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. Mr. and Mrs. Clark are being escorted by Minnesota's Adjutant General, Major General Sean Mankey. In memory of law enforcement officers who died on 9/11 in the line of duty, a wreath is being presented by St. Paul Police Commander Jack Searier. Commander Searier is being escorted by Minnesota Commissioner of Public Safety, John Harrington. In memory of firefighters who died on 9/11 in the line of duty, a wreath is being presented by Chief Deputy Fire Marshal Amanda Swenson. Deputy Fire Marshal Swenson is being escorted by State Fire Marshal Jim Smith. In memory of emergency medical workers who died on 9/11 in the line of duty, a wreath is being presented by St. Paul Deputy Fire Chief Ken Adams. Deputy Chief Adams is being escorted by St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter. In memory of the innocent international citizens that were victims of 9/11, and in memory of our Allied military service members who fought and died alongside U.S. forces, a wreath is being presented by the Canadian Consul General of the United States, Ariel DeLuya. Consul General DeLuya is being escorted by Congresswoman Betty McCollum. And finally, in memory of all American citizens who died on 9/11, a wreath is being presented by Miss Judy Schneider and Mary Jo Keckler, sisters of Gary Keckler, who was killed when the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. They are being escorted by Governor and First Lady Walz. Please be seated. At this time, please welcome Minnesota's Poet Laureate, Dr. Gwen Westerman.
Hamitakiapi. Hello, everyone. The work of a poet is observation and finding a way to help express what's in the hearts of the people. My offering for you today is a poem by Billy Collins, the former Poet Laureate of the United States. The names. Yesterday, I lay awake in the palm of night. A soft rain stole in, unhelped by any breeze, and when I saw the silver glaze on the windows, I started with A, with Ackerman, as it happened, then Baxter and Calabro, Davis and Eberling, names falling into place as droplets fell through the dark. Names printed on the ceiling of the night. Names slipping around a watery bend. 26 willows on the banks of a stream. In the morning, I walked out barefoot among thousands of flowers, heavy with dew like the eyes of tears, and each had a name. Fiore inscribed on a yellow petal, then Gonzalez and Hahn, Ishikawa and Jenkins, names written in the air and stitched into the cloth of the day. A name under a photograph taped to a mailbox, monogram on a torn shirt. I see you spelled out on storefront windows and on the bright unfurled awnings of this city. I say the syllables as I turn a corner. Kelly and Lee, Medina, Nardea, and O'Connor. When I peer into the woods, I see a thick tangle where letters are hidden as in a puzzle concocted for children. Parker and Quigley in the twigs of an ash. Rizzo, Schubert, Torres, and Upton. Secrets in the boughs of an ancient maple. Names written in the pale sky. Names rising in the updraft amid buildings. Names silent in stone or cried out behind a door. Names blown over the earth and out to sea. In the evening, weakening light, the last swallows. A boy on a lake lifts his oars. A woman by a window puts a match to a candle. And the names are outlined on the rose clouds. Vanacore and Wallace. Let X, if it can, stand for the ones unfound. Then Young and Zeminski, the final jolt of Z, names etched on the head of a pin. one name spanning a bridge, another undergoing a tunnel, a blue name needled into the skin, names of citizens, workers, mothers and fathers, the bright-eyed daughter, the quick son, alphabet of names in a green field, names in the small tracks of birds, names lifted from a hat or balanced on the tip of the tongue, names wheeled into the dim warehouse of memory. So many names, there is barely room on the walls of our hearts.
Thank you, Dr. Westerman. We do have one speaker left that's up here, and for our benediction, please stand once again and welcome Minnesota National Guard Chaplain, Colonel Daniel Puljo.
We have venerated this day by gathering to honor, to remember, and to reflect. And those events 20 years ago have marked and altered our lives personally, communally, nationally, as we have been reminded time and again this morning. We were wounded. We have scars. Some are seen, others are invisible to the eye. However, it is up to each of us that the past evil does not define our present and our future. We get to write these chapters. Our life together depends on our attitudes and the intents of our hearts. Perhaps George Bernard Shaw's words can frame the path for our future. He said this: "This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. Being a true force of nature instead of feverish little clods of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I'm of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community. And as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up to the time I die. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch which I've got to hold up for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to the future generations." So receive the benediction. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. May this blessing be showered upon us, Almighty God. Amen.